we're going to relate to such issues as universality of the term post-industrial city or town. How context related is the concept? How much transferable to other political, geographical, or economic factors? We're also going to look at the difference between small towns and large cities, having in mind the importance of the urban functional structure in general, the components of the territorial capital, including governance, leadership, the local community with its human and social capital. The first part of the session, because we're planning to have 3 in fact, will pertain to the social aspects behind the state and development of post-industrial cities. We'll also this is something that I have to leave for the end because there might be another speaker joining us at the end, but this is still an open question. And then in the second part, we will ask what should be done and what can we do with the current state, with the post-industrial city, in terms of this resurgence or enhancing maybe other complementary urban functions. How do we support the cities or towns' identity? And again, how specific, how tailor-made should the policies be? As I said, we have 4 speakers, fantastic speakers today, who will relate to these and other questions. And maybe if we have time, we hope to have time for that. We have the last round of some questions and answers, and also maybe questions and answers from speaker to speaker. So I would like to, for the start, welcome my guests. Professor Al Mallach, who you have already met. Just to say a few words, additionally, Professor Mallach is Senior Fellow at the Center for Community Progress in Washington, D.C. He's both a practitioner and a researcher, so I would say that 2 in 1. No more to say. He'll say more today. The second speaker, or today the first speaker, is Dr. Mirosław Grochowski, who is geographer and senior lecturer and researcher at the University of Warsaw. Dr. Grochowski, although an academic dealing with spatial planning as well as urban and metropolitan governance, is also engaged in application research and is known for his cooperation with local as well as regional governments. We have also Katrin, this is Professor Dr. Katrin Grossmann, who is currently Professor of Urban and Spatial Sociology at the University of Applied Sciences, Erfurt in Germany. Her interests include urban and rural sociology as well as urban planning. And we have Professor Marek Dutkowski, who is full professor at the Institute of Spatial Management and Socioeconomic Geography at the University of Szczecin, and his field of expertise encompasses economic geography, geostatistics, as well as geoinformatics. Starting with the question of universality, transferability, I would like to ask Dr. Grochowski to say a few words about the situation in the post-industrial city today, the concept, the universality of the concept and the specificity.
Okay, so the first sentence, my sentence was that I'm grateful for inviting me to be part of this discussion, and my contribution will be some comments on post-industrial cities from the perspective of policy making and management of change. And I think that some of these issues that you see on that you will see on the slides are pretty important when we talk about current situation of post-industrial cities and what may happen in the future. There is no one type of industrial cities. This category is very broad, and when we talk about common features, then I think we may say that they used to have industry, and the industry was very important for the economic base, and the second feature would be that they are in troubles. However, we can ascribe a set of other features or characteristics to these cities, which means the number of population, area. Also, location is very important, whether they are in peripheral regions or located centrally with very good accessibility. The spatial context is also important, surrounding areas, regional context. Also the role of these cities they used to play in settlement system, because this role positioned them somehow in this network. And models of governance and mode of development, and of course the path of development, which means history. And I'm mentioning these other features because it depends on them in what conditions these post-industrial cities are. If the business portfolio is well developed, they may go through this deindustrialization process pretty smoothly. If they are smaller, if they are located in peripheral areas, then they will suffer, no doubt, and they will have to deal with some kind of structural problems, and it won't be easy to solve these problems. So it leads me to conclusion that there is no one size fits all, which means that if we think about policy making and management of change, we have to tailor interventions. We have to customize them depending on location of these cities, so that if we talk about intervention in terms of size, form, and scale, everything has to be adjusted. And I find this statement very important because it shows very important role of local governments or city self-governments, because it's up to them what scenarios will be drafted, how they are going to draft these scenarios just by themselves, by experts, together with inhabitants, etc., etc. So it's a question of governance, in fact, and a very important question of actors that I will be also talking about later. So that's the first thing that I want to share with you, the whole variety of post-industrial cities and some common features, but these features that are unique and very specific, they are crucial for how deep the crisis in these cities is, or what are the chances to survive and then to succeed, maybe to develop in the future. And the second thing that I want to raise at the beginning is this crisis and social aspects or social consequences. I think that the important thing that we should think about is the speed of these changes, or how quickly the changes took place. Whether it was maybe we cannot control these processes, but at least we can react somehow, or it just happened, like maybe not overnight, but over some weeks or months, and suddenly we are in this post-industrial city with all the consequences. These changes, they can be manifested in different ways, and usually we talk about urban fabric, about spatial structure, functional structure, also changes in social structures and distribution of different groups. But I think that the key question is about performance, how city performs, because everything, all these physical space changes, functional, etc., etc., it will be translated somehow into living conditions, working conditions, etc. So cities perform, and it's in my opinion, is very useful term because it may help us to prepare diagnosis, to evaluate the general conditions, and to identify different bottlenecks. And the next thing that I want to touch is who pays costs of this transformation or transition, or costs of the fact that suddenly industry disappeared from our cities. And that's something about the current state, but also about the future, because I believe that in any process of transformation of post-industrial cities, we have to go through social process of scoping, which means, you know, deciding about specific ways to come back on development path. But it's not only about priorities, but also about costs, general costs. It's a question about, can we afford it? I'm thinking about self-government budgets. Can they just, you know, draft scenarios and prepare programs that are realistic? I will talk about it later a little more. And the last thing is distribution of costs and benefits. And I'm thinking about distribution of costs and benefits among different social groups, among different professional groups. It's related directly to what Professor Sagan said about human resources, and that without these human resources, we can forget about, you know, bringing change to the city, I think. We can play with investors, we can play, with some other solutions, use different tricks, but people, and that's something which is in the core of all programs. So that's what I wanted to say at the beginning, and that's my first 2 slides. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for this. Well, you did mention something, what I understand is territorial capital versus territorial position and all its factors and components, which in fact, are behind this complexity and the specificity of this phenomenon, which we understand as the post-industrial city or town, right? So thank you very much. Alan Mallach, I would like you to continue on this topic, maybe with some examples from your research that could also highlight the difference between a small town and a large city reality. Also, additionally to what you are planning to tell us.
Yeah. I think the issue of size is extremely significant in terms of the implications for the future of these cities. And I think one of the things, and Professor Grochowski mentioned this, is both the level of human capital, the capacity of governance, and the existence of networks of social capital. And all of these, of course, vary significantly depending on the size of the city. Now, in the United States, what we found, and I believe there are a lot of parallels in European cities, that cities, small cities, clearly do not have the types of facilities, such as, again, major research universities or hospitals, centers of major governmental functions, business activities, that allow them to start drawing in migration of people with high levels of education and talent and so forth. And in fact, have great difficulty coming up with economic activity to replace the industrial activity. So what happens, of course, it becomes a vicious cycle. In the absence of economic activity, these cities become increasingly dependent, essentially, on governmental transfer payments. And in fact, in some of small American cities, and again, this is particularly significant for peripheral cities, small cities that are close enough to a major center can very often build an economy that is essentially linked to the major center. And we see this in the cities, for example, in the periphery of New York or in the periphery of Boston. Cities that are in the peripheral areas without these connections become largely dependent on government transfer payments, which of course tend to perpetuate a relatively low quality of life and relatively low standard of living, which in turn tend to perpetuate outmigration of the people with the talent and the highest levels of social capital. And of course, in these cases, the quality of governance is often very limited. The skill levels available to local government to execute programs, even assuming they knew what programs to execute, become increasingly limited. They become dependent sometimes on, in some cases, the national government or perhaps the EU will provide technical or financial resources, but essentially they lack internal resources. Some cities, and in fact, in some work Katrin and I have done in terms of looking at other cities, the informal systems of what one Russian scholar referred to as do-it-yourself urbanism have replaced some of the formal governance systems, which is an interesting phenomenon. But I think that's really inadequate to provide the systems that will truly regenerate these cities. So I think there's a real crisis facing the smaller cities that is at a level that's much more severe than a city like Warsaw or even Sofia or New York or Boston have amazing resources they can draw upon to say. Small cities lack these resources. And I think this is one of the biggest and most difficult challenges of the whole post-industrial urban question.
Okay, thanks a lot for that. But then on the other hand, small towns do often perform central place functions. And what happens in such a situation? We'll continue with a very interesting example from Professor Katrin Grossmann, referring to a noteworthy case study of a small town in Eastern Germany.
So the first remark I want to make is I'll kind of continue what Alan has just started. So this was like the overview, and now I go to an example, and I will kind of agree and disagree with him because, of course, the world is never black and white, but we have to nail some points. This is a cooperative work, and I have here also the names of my co-authors for this study, Leona Sandmann and Sven Messerschmidt. And to start with, I would like to ask the moderators to show a little movie that brings us to the scene. So I stop the presentation, or what's the plan? Probably.
Katrin, it was all right. We've seen the presentation before.
And we're waiting for the film now, right?
Okay.
Okay, but this is...
And for quality reasons, I will not share the film, but the moderators will do that so that you can have best quality.
The organizers, not
the organizers, yes, I'm sorry.
So we're waiting for the organizers to choose the film. Hoping that everything's all right.
I think someone says the film is on the screen, so maybe we're not seeing it here.
Yeah. See, that could be, okay.
Okay.
So this is the design.
So you would see glass production in a museum
film
like
is on.
Factory setting. So what you've seen is a short glimpse into what was the industrial presence of a small town called Lauscha, which represents this type of towns. When we talk about deindustrialized cities, we often forget. This graph shows you that in blue, the small towns represent kind of the backbone of the settlement system here in Germany, but this holds true for a lot of other countries in Europe and beyond. Small towns in Germany represent 1/3 of all the population, nearly half the settlement area, and nearly half of the total number of municipalities. Lauscha, you can see the town here in this picture, is thus one among many post-industrial, peripheral, small, and very beautiful towns. And the image of the small town today often is one of rurality, and rurality resembles agriculture. At most, it resembles tourism. But very often, these small towns have been places of industrial production, and the post-industrial city but is imagined as a large city, Manchester, Łódź, Genoa, or Chemnitz maybe in Germany. But this is also a post-industrial town. Lauscha's location is both a blessing and a curse. It's in the mountains, as you can see here down in the bottom. This is Thuringia, and in the map you can see where in Germany Thuringia is located. So we're actually in the center, and at the same time we're in a periphery. It's a place of that is very badly connected traffic-wise and is remotely located, and therefore it is a place of outmigration. The industrial history, however, is still relevant to the local economy. I'll show you in a minute. And it's relevant to the place's identity, to the pride, and to the social relations. As one inhabitant said, Lauscha was known for innovations, such as the Christmas tree decorations or glass eye prostheses, toys like the glass marbles. And the full history of the place is connected to this one branch of industry. It was even founded, the town was founded with the development of the glass industry. Many innovations came from here, including the invention of the glass eye prosthesis, and it has been recognized globally for the Christmas tree decorations, which then have been exported to like all over the world. You can still buy them. They are still produced, as you can see in this picture, handmade, made in Lauscha for 120 euro. Or, of course, you can go to Amazon and order this for €6.79, made in China. And guess what people do? So this is why glass production today in Lauscha is something of the history. The upper left picture shows you the little outlet that is still there, the glass factory that is still there. But most of this is low amounts of production, and often for special occasions only or for markets. And most of the glass production is a museum, as in the right-hand picture. If you think then they should innovate and do something different with the glass, well, they do. As you can see in this picture, you could even buy a Corona ball for decoration if you like in the right side of the picture. There is a group of young artists developing non-traditional glass artworks as a focus, but this is not enough to replace all those jobs that have been lost. And this is why I agree and disagree with Alan, because the human side is maybe even the strongest capital that they have. And it's not the case that, at least for this place, there's a total dependence on the state. But of course, there is a decline, and this decline looks like this population-wise. The population number has been going down steadily ever since the past 30 or here 25 years. This means the place is aging rapidly, as the second figure here shows. 51 is the average age. There are housing vacancies appearing, and there is hidden housing vacancies where one person lives in one of these houses full, and respondents tell us that they are overburdened with their houses. They are too big. While the household size has gone down rapidly, this means average living space has risen here from 36 square meters per person to 53 square meters in just 25 years. So there is vacancies to come if there is no miracle or silver bullet that will bring back the place. So altogether, deindustrialization is also a common experience in small towns. I believe it may have an even more damaging effect here because it intersects with peripheral locations, with outmigration, with less infrastructure for innovation and less resources and amenities to redevelop. Deindustrialization may be even of higher relevance to the local identity because there is no university here, there is no transport hub or something that can easily step in to local identity construction. Thus, small towns deserve attention in research and practice, and we have to overcome the stereotype-based guesses that we have there at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Katrin. So as you see, we have deindustrialization on the one hand, and then we also have this double periphery effect, right? So, but then on the other hand, we have identity, which is extremely strong. And again, I'm returning to this territorial capital aspect, right? Because identity is one of the components, I would say, one of the subcomponents at least. Okay, thank you very much. Now we're going over to a case of a, well, I would say a big city, so something different, but on the other hand, we also observe many similar phenomena. I would like to ask Marek Dutkowski to talk about port cities in Poland, which are suffering from a decline of shipbuilding or shipyard industry.
Well, thank you for an invitation. I'm going to tell about the port cities, the large port cities. In the first part, first 5 minutes, I'm going about the history, about the background, regeneration and replacement of industrial functions of Polish port cities. In the second part, I will tell about the ways, about the paths, how to do something to remain industrial functions or to replace them. The industrial functions of port cities have their roots in boat building, the production of crafts necessary to the construction of ships, for instance, sails, masts, ropes, cannons, and so on, as well as in the processing of biotic raw materials of the sea, as a good example are salted herrings, as well as raw material and semi-finished products transships in port. Examples: coal, tobacco, tea, spices, wood, diamonds, and precious stones. With the introduction of iron for the construction of ships and the steam engine to propel them, the shipyards became industrial plants, although more like assembly plants, requiring numerous production connections with the facilities in the hinterland. The requirements for the crew have also changed. They went from highly skilled boat builders, rope makers, and sail makers to narrowly specialized shipyard workers. This situation persists for many decades. The industrialization of large Polish cities like Gdańsk and Szczecin took place in the second half of the 19th century in the German state in the Prussian Reich. After the Second World War, Poland took over a significant, though severely devastated production potential in all of this location, especially in Gdańsk, and then in Szczecin, then in Gdynia. As a result of the industrialization of port cities, port and industrial districts were formed, which concentrated so-called motor activities according to the polarization theory of port cities, such as shipyards, and in the years 1960, 1980, they constituted the inner city growth poles of Gdańsk, Szczecin, and Gdynia, and they really dominated the economic, political, and social landscape of these cities. Although all of these port cities, they were never typical industrial cities, because the importance of port and with port connected services influenced their economic base. But even mirroring with the production, mirroring with the employment, the industry was not dominated. In fact, it is a motor activity for these cities. Supply plants were located, if possible, near the shipyards. Together with other entities collocated in the hinterland, they formed the matured ship product cluster union of the shipbuilding industry, Zjednoczenie Przemysłu Okrętowego. It was an important component of the maritime economy supercluster, because such organizational model was also in these years functioning. Of course, by the conditions of the centrally controlled economy. The food industry, with the exception of fish processing, used pre-war facilities and industrial plants using raw materials and semi-finished products transshipped in ports. For instance, steel mill in Szczecin, coffee roasting plants in Szczecin, in Gdynia, fish processing plants, and all of these locations. A new refinery is now the biggest industrial plant in Gdańsk, is the oil refinery, and nitrogen plants in Police is also a big plant. It's not administratively in Szczecin, but very with the city connected. They supplemented the industrial functions of these cities. However, as I said, shipyards and their direct partners located in the port and the industry districts dominated. And of course, the events in 1970 and 1980 were connected with the high concentration of so-called working class in the very small areas of the port and industrial districts. In Gdynia, for instance, in a small area of 3 or 2 square kilometers, were about 50,000 of workers. It was, in fact, almost all worked in these workers, a part of these indigenous function like schools and so on, worked in this area. The change of the political economics system in 90s led to the maritime, to the fall of the maritime supercluster, along with the shipbuilding cluster. The collapse occurred around 2000, and you can see the causes. They are low productivity measured by CGT. It's a special index of industrial of shipyard production, the low technological level. It are technological causes, and then the market causes, the disappearance of the Soviet market. It was very important, especially for Gdańsk and Szczecin shipyard, and strong global competition. Then organizational, there's really bad management from the very beginning, with some exceptions, and excessive employment. And it was a big, really big social and political problem, because the shipyard workers cannot understand that they are too much for this production. It was, in Gdańsk, it was in the best years 15,000 workers only in one shipyard, in Gdynia shipyard, or in Vulcan, or in Szczecin, Warszawski shipyard. There were also more than 10,000. No, of course, no, all of them was directly connected with the construction of ships. And then at the end, political and financial causes. There is no financing for current production. It's important for every shipyard in the world, and lack of effective support from the state, from the Polish state, and the European Union. It is about the reviewing. I can set in Poland that currently several ships are manufactured in Poland in 1995. 10, it is, if you compare it with the 60s or 70s, it is in fact nothing, with a small capacity of several dozen thousand BRT, and several dozen repairs are carried out. Many manufactured are elements of war on vessels to foreign shipyards. The production of seagoing yachts is still developing, but rather outside the large Polish cities. Some of the yacht shipyards are functioning, but most of them outside of these areas. For several years, attempts have been made to revive shipbuilding in Poland, and I will tell you about these attempts in the next part of my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Marek. That was extremely interesting. I would really appreciate if you could, in the second round, if you could focus on the difference between the cities you talked about, right? Because then we could compare the role of territorial capital in both cases, in terms of governance, in terms of human and social capital, right? Okay, right. So as I said, we still don't know enough, but we know a little more about the state with the examples that were mentioned. And I think we are, well, I would say we're circulating somewhere near to this term, which I call territorial capital. Understanding is it in the way Kamani understands it, but we of course have our ways of identifying these components, and then also talking about universality and specificity. We talk about the future. We talk about the possibilities. We talk about, let's say, complementary functions. That is, with which functions could we maybe, in the case of small towns and in the case of large cities, complement, or maybe to maintain the towns or the cities' identity, what ideas do we come up with in terms of policy and in terms of investment in human and social capital. I think we'll start in the same order. So we'll proceed in the same order as in the first, but I think, you know, to give to leave some space for questions, possible questions at the end, I would really like to you to talk for like no more than 6 minutes, and then we'll have some time for maybe a small exchange of questions and answers and maybe some discussion. Okay, so Mirek, we're starting with you again. What can we do with the post-industrial city?
What can we do with post-industrial city? Again, I'm some remarks from this perspective of policymaking and management of change. I think that first of all, there is no way back in the sense that the cities will not become industrial in the sense that they used to be in the past. And it has to be, I mean, someone who is trying to sell this idea to inhabitants and investors that you can build on what you had several years ago, it's a kind of misunderstanding. I think that what is needed is, first of all, very objective and serious and realistic assessment of resources that we have, and also of what left after industrial era, this heritage, because I'm afraid that very often self-governments are trying to come up with something new and they don't remember that this is very valuable assets. And again, evaluation of development potential, which is very good example because we did a study on creative sector in different cities, capitals of Polish regions, and which is the only example where this sector has a chance probably to have impact on what's going on. And I think that from policymaking perspective, the key issue is where to anchor our activities, where to start, what's the starting point, because we have to decide. You can't, you know, improve everything in public life, and you cannot deal with everything at the same time. And I think that there is a problem now. I'm speaking about Poland specifically and about easy money from EU, because I think that many investments are not investments that make sense. I mean here that they will not have significant impact on development paths. You have to analyze very carefully every euro or every Polish zloty when you invest. You have to have this vision and long-term plan, although it sounds, you know, like a banal statement, but that's true. And I think that in case of this fiscal situation that we have, it's very important to talk about costs, about investments and results, whether they fit this broader framework. It's very important to talk about distribution of costs among different groups. And the last thing is about risk assessment. And this exercise, I'm afraid, is not very well known among people who are in charge of our city's general development. And if we agree that there is no one-size solution and that interventions should be customized, I think that from the point of view of management, a question of actors' empowerment and the issue of multi-level governance, we've spent a lot of time talking about it, and I'm afraid that it's still a slogan. And we have different levels of governance, and this cooperation, they exist because they have to exist, or at least you have to report that you cooperate. But I don't see, you know, real cooperation between national, regional, and local governments in terms of urban policy. I also think that that this spatial context, regional context, is very important, and that it's time to move from the paradigm of competitiveness to the paradigm of cooperation. I think that this paradigm of competitiveness has destroyed a lot of very important linkages and relationships, because all people, we compete, and that's sick situation. If you look at the literature on cities and cooperation and networks in the 60s and the previous century, you could read that cities do not only compete, they cooperate, and it's very important for their performance. And the last thing is that human resources are key resources, because if you envision the change, you envision it for someone. We talk about social creation of space. So it has to be translated somehow into different measures and mechanisms and instruments that are being used by politicians and managers who deal with development of post-industrial cities. So that's what I had to share with you in the second part. Thank you.
Okay. Alan, you were engaged in developing creative policies and strategies for building cities and their neighborhoods. How specific and how tailor-made should these policies be? Can we learn from them somehow? Can we transfer them to other contexts?
Well, I think every city is different, and yet every city is the same. So that's not really as paradoxical as it sounds. There are a lot of common elements, but you have to look at the specific features of the city in order to adapt the common strategies. And I think a lot of it starts with the question is there a economic, in a very classic sense, is there an economic function that this city can perform today? Because I agree with Professor Grochowski, there is no way back. And industrial nostalgia, which is very common in these cities, is not a productive state of mind at all. And so the question is, and they really have to be very cold-blooded about this, is there a rational economic function that a city, whether it be in the hinterland of Bulgaria or the hinterland of Ohio, can perform in today's economy? And if there is, then they have to focus on this. And again, and I thought that was a very important point, to the extent that there are resources, whether it's national government, EU, or others, there are discretionary resources available. They can't simply be spread across the city in terms of vanity projects and whatever, the things that the local officials think the fad of the month, if you will. There has to be a strategy and thinking about how to use investments in ways that will be transformative and actually either move the economic function forward, or if there really isn't, and I'm not sure there is a rational economic function for many of the small cities and towns that exist in the developed world, then I think the function really has to be on focusing on the human capital that exists in these cities and ensuring that people living and growing up in these cities have the opportunity to grow their talents, even if it means that they end up leaving. And secondly, to improve the quality of life in these cities so the people who are there, whether they are performing economic functions or are dependent on transfer payments, have a good quality of life. Those to me are very fundamental issues. And one third issue, which is particularly important for the cities that do have strong economic functions, whether they be national capitals or major centers of higher education and healthcare, that the economic growth be designed so it is shared broadly by the population. Because I think there is a huge risk. And I've seen this, I've studied this in United States cities, but I believe it's not just an American phenomenon. The economic polarization, where you have the people who have the education, the people who have the skills, benefit from the economic growth, get the jobs. The people who do not, including the former industrial workers and their families, essentially become a left behind population within a city that may be growing economically, but not for them. So I think those are some of the issues that have to be confronted as we look at regeneration of these cities.
Yeah, thank you very much, Katrin. I would say that an additional question to what you're about to say is, can we, or do we go beyond policies? I mean, is there something that characterizes a local community which allows it to maintain its identity, the city or the community to maintain its identity in spite of the loss or decline of its main leading, of the town's main leading function?
I guess you point into a direction that has not been clarified really, and that is, where do we want these places to develop to? So what is the normative orientation for any, whatever it might look like, future? And if it is to give up the place and to move elsewhere. But all this it's much easier to provide policy advice if you know where you want to go. And this seems largely unclear. So a lot of those places strive for regrowth, economic regrowth, jobs. This paradigm has been questioned a lot, and now we're looking for other possibilities. So Alan has just suggested to improve the quality of life. Livability is one of the issues. And we've heard a couple of these ideas also in the other talks. I currently, with great interest, explore the idea of dignity instead, because to give those places material wealth and similar resources and to have equal living conditions seems unlikely. But for the population, for identity issues, for self-respect, I think dignity could be a very interesting guiding principle. If you look into the philosophic literature, dignity often is addressed in 3 dimensions. One is recognition and respect of outsiders. The second one would be self-esteem, self-respect, to live up to your own self-image. And the third one, and most important one, is self-determination. So I think the best policies for these places are those that are self-determined by the local population, but supported by knowledge and also by resources. And I could show you, if you like, for a second only, the website of one project where I think these criteria are met. Let me see if I can do this easily. I'll probably just share the second screen and go there. That's the Kulturhanse, which is a European project. This is the German side of it. It's an initiative, a practical initiative from the civic society to go to different small towns as you see in this little map, and to support their own initiatives in small labs, funders labs, it's called. And what they do is, for instance, here in Altenburg, which is another, it's literally translated, it's seniors castle, Altenburg, which is actually true. It's the on average oldest city or town in Germany, and the support here goes. It's not, you know, bringing in a lot of wealth, bringing in external strategies. I've once heard a strategy for Detroit that came from Copenhagen, cycling Detroit, bringing the bicycle to Detroit, and I thought, what kind of weird strategy is it to bring something that works in Copenhagen to Detroit, Moto City? Really, this cannot rise self-esteem, very unlikely, and it's not self-determined, so it won't do a good job anyway. And I think somewhere in that direction are good ideas that can be met. Okay, and I'll stop the screen sharing.
Fantastic. Dignity it is. Okay. Okay. Well, Marek, now turning to your examples, because I think you didn't really have enough time to show us the differences, the specificity of these three examples, right? So maybe you could continue on that and then finish off with some conclusions concerning both policies and the engagement of the community, right?
No, thank you. It was about the collapse of the, and then to revive the shipbuilding sector, it is possible. It should be noted that the collapse had no impact, in fact, on the demographic situation of the port cities, the large port cities. The psychosocial effects were most felt in Szczecin, and up to today we can feel it in this city. To some extent in Gdańsk, and almost entirely not in Gdynia. For several years, attempts have been made to revive shipbuilding in Poland. However, these efforts are initiated by domestic and foreign private entities in the first line, and generally supported by local and regional government authorities. A central scale, both maritime and industrial policy are missing. It is not only the problem of the shipbuilding industry, but also all branches of the industry in Poland. In general, however, Polish large port cities have lost the potential for endogenous regeneration of shipbuilding as a motor activity and an important component of their economic base. In a situation of significant demand for vessels, ships and equipment connected with them, despite periodic slowdowns of these demand, theoretically, a large foreign investment is still possible, which one of the cities may open up new prospects. For instance, the field of offshore wind farm production and their service vessels, specialist vessels, and even warships. So, I will show you the following, some trends they can be observed to maintain or to replace the industrial functions of Polish large cities. The first, the maintenance. They are slimming, miniaturization, specialization, and dispersion, also spatial dispersion into small companies of shipyards and their cooperators. A good example is Remontowa, say in Gdańsk, Kryse say, but we can also talk about the Netherlands Damen in Gdynia, who is part of the biggest of the big Damen group. And then the second trend is the new industrial functions, mainly in the suburbs. This is in Gdańsk, for Gdańsk, in Gdynia, it is Żukowo, and Kolbudy community. In Szczecin is Goleniów. In fact, we have no industry in Szczecin, but we have industry in the Szczecin industrial district. It means in the first line in the economic zone of Goleniów, and some of these plants are very modern. For instance, they produce parts of wind farms and so on. But also in industrial districts, especially, for instance, in Gdynia, but also in Gdańsk, there are no more it is industry, but no more a shipbuilding industry. For instance, in Gdynia is located a big puzzle producer, Tref. They are producing next to the water in the previous area of the other producing plants, and then replacing. So the first trend is the metropolization of the economy. They are fiery BPO, and it is the way of Warsaw, way of Poznań, Kraków, and so on, and some management functions. Also management, the group LPP has, it is textile and industry, and the big chain of shops and so on. It is located in Gdańsk. Then the second trend is strengthening and modernization of the traditional central regional functions. This is an example of Szczecin. Szczecin is no more industrial port. Szczecin tries to be maritime city, and there is a lot of money invested in it, and there is also, to some extent, a big propaganda about this. But in fact, the real maritime cities, but are connected. This is far away. What is growing is the traditional old function of Szczecin as a capital of Pomerania. Now is Pomerania, as we know, it divided into German and Polish part, but these functions live very slowly. We have to fight with barriers, but it is also by in German part of Pomerania accepted, and Szczecin gains activity as the capital with traditional central and regional functions like Philharmonia and theater and other new malls for retail and so on. And development of maritime and river waterfronts, including the post-shipyards areas. And in all of these cities, it is a product of cooperation, private, public, and so on and so on. In Gdańsk, it is a young city, it's a very big project. And in Gdynia is waterfront, and in Szczecin is Łasztownia. And this, the biggest project is, of course, the most advanced project is young city in Gdańsk, and the smallest in Łasztownia. And then extension of port functions. It is also a new investment. We can see it in new terminals and rebuilding, modernization, and so on, and plans to rebuild, to extend ports. And all of these three ports have especially Świnoujście as well, and the new gas port in Świnoujście. So it is back to the classical function of seaside city, namely port functions. And then development of maritime and coastal tourism, and the fitness recreation sector in Gdynia. Gdynia has been visited for many cruisers, tourist cruisers, and also in Gdynia, what is really something interesting, the cultural functions were developed. For 20 years, there is, in fact, or for 30 years, they said Gdynia is cultural desert. Now it's one of the important points for Polish film, for Polish literature, and so on and so on. And there are conditions for the success. The first condition is the policies. It should be active and consequent. And cooperation between self-government and local, regional government authorities, especially when the self-government is from other party and the central government is from other party. We have this situation. It is a normal situation in democracy. They should cooperate in the areas of port and the industrial districts. It is very important. Then it is what is very important in my eyes is the emergence of strong personalities, of leaders of change. And there was Mr. Piotr Sorka already died. For Remontowa group, there is a group of young engineers in the CRIST group. And then the third condition is the human, social, and intellectual capital tied to the city's maritime traditions and landscapes. It is a very nice term, maritime citizenship. It is important to be this maritime identity, and part of this maritime identity is, of course, also shipbuilding industry, but not only. And then at the end, I would like to present some survival strategies for shipbuilding workers. Of course, they have been touched, especially in Szczecin, to some extent in Gdańsk, and to some extent in Gdynia. And there are 5 strategies. The first strategy I called new shipyard worker. There's not only worker, but there are also people, not only blue collars, but also white collars, I would say. It is survival, diminished, restructured enterprises in the shipbuilding industry, including construction offices. Yeah, the number of construction offices is growing. There are some people that remain in Remontowa and previously Commune, Paris Commune, or the Gdynia shipyard, not in Szczecin, because in Szczecin is no more real shipyard. And the second strategy is a global shipyard worker. I'll call them global worker. They're employed in the foreign or even Polish companies, small companies providing specialized production, maintenance, repair services on the global on the global market, especially industrial. Their world changed totally. They previously they worked in one place. They worked in they do the same in the shipyard. Now they worked even in Dubai. They worked in Canada. They work in Finland. And they go there by air, and they are completely different. I know personally such people. They are different. They are different people because the Polish shipyards collapsed. The third strategy is a former shipyard worker. They are permanent or periodic employment in production and service companies of various industries, different industries, but they use the skills and experience gained in the shipbuilding industry. And the fourth one is a non-shipyard worker. They are employed in as small and middle companies, or they also they are self-employed in various industries or services, rarely related to the shipbuilding industry. And then the fifth is the retired shipyard workers. They are, to some extent, some of them are very frustrated, especially because they lost the pride to be a shipyard worker. It was in Szczecin, even in Gdynia and in Gdańsk, as I said, especially after 1980, it was something to be a shipyard worker. And they get their retirement. They went to the remainder of the pension, and sometimes they take occasional work in the shadow economy using contacts, especially contact skills, and some experience gained in the shipbuilding industry. So it is all. Thank you.
Okay, but I'm not muted anymore. It says I'm muted. No, I'm not muted anymore. Okay. Thank you, Marek. I wonder how far can these survival strategies for shipyard or shipbuilding workers be transferred to other industrial jobs? Alan, what do you think about that? Can we dare to look at this as something transferable?
Yeah, you know, shipbuilding industry is very specific because to complete a ship, you need workers from very different. Some of them they are specialized, but in fact they are able to find their job in different industrial or surveys companies, because it is the same, but in the shipbuilding industry it was at a higher level. So it is in fact no problem.
Maybe anybody else wants to add something to that, to these survival strategies that we at the end.
I think part of the problem is these industries, and I think of parallels with the steel making industry in American cities. These industries historically, as Marek mentioned, employed 10,000 people, 15,000 people. There's a new steel mill in Youngstown, which was a historic steel making center. It sits on the site of an old steel mill. The old steel mill employed 10,000 people. The new steel mill employs 350 people, and most of those people require technical or vocational education in order to operate complex machinery, computers, and so forth. So the industry isn't going to disappear, but a lot of the industrial jobs are disappearing, and there are a lot of complexities about the adaptation of people who worked in industry and who took great pride, typically. I mean, the people who made ships, the people who made steel, were people who took tremendous pride in the work they did and in their physical ability to do that work. And to say to some such person, you can no longer do that, but we will retrain you to be a nurse, for example. It's a difficult psychological process. And I think that's a whole issue that really has to be confronted, is how to really help people adjust to a very different environment and a very different work environment, as well as a larger environment.
Right. Okay, well, thank you very much for that. Well, in fact, we got some 8, 5, 6, 7 more minutes. So, I mean, I was counting on some questions from the public or from the outside, but if we don't get any, this is also time to exchange some thoughts, and maybe one of you has a question that you want to ask the other person. So this is the time for that as well. So just to maybe kind of go deeper into one of these aspects. I don't want to dare and use this time to, sum up all these ideas, because I think we're trying now and again to sum it up. So I think we have gathered all these thoughts already, but I think maybe any ideas or any questions that you want to ask. Yes, yeah, okay.
I would like to say, after our discussion of these presentations, in my opinion, the real problem of post-industrial cities, the small cities, especially peripheral cities, they were, I would say, too high specialized glass. I know some cities in the Rhineland-Pfalz, there are shoes production, they are over-industrialized. So when they lost this function, it is a real big problem. The same is in the middle-sized cities, which especially in Poland and some also in the eastern lands of Germany, they were also over-industrialized. Is like Neubrandenburg and so on. In Poland, we can mention also such cities. It is not so bad as they by small cities, but in some of them, especially Radom, for instance, it is a big problem. For the large cities, I think it is not so important thing, because, as I said, as an example of port cities, there are many ways how to maintain some functions, industrial functions, perhaps different, or how to say goodbye, industry, we are something else to do. So, thank you.
Okay, but Katrin, you were just about to ask.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about what our Polish colleagues think of the role of the state, because the little bit I am familiar with Polish debates and context, I know that there is huge skepticism towards the role of the state, but on the other hand, we've also learned that without some support, it's very unlikely that the social capital that might be there may be mobilized. So that would be of interest to me.
The Polish example is the port cities. There are less state, the better.
If I may,
Okay, but there
Especially the people from Warsaw, they don't understand it. We have bad experience with all political parties trying to do something for shipyard industry.
Okay.
It's better when the business and the local people do it.
Okay, maybe we have some other opinions on that. Mirek, I think you wanted to say something.
yeah, I wanted to yes, I will try to answer Katrin's question, but before that, I would like to say that
We got 3 minutes. We got 3 minutes.
Okay.
We're out. Throw us out.
Okay, so shortly, we are talking about economic recovery in the context of post-industrial cities, and I think that what is important is cultural context. This example with Copenhagen, I think that creativity, imagination, this kind of things are needed, and it's about, whether we are prepared as communities to do that. When it comes to state role, I think that in many cases, cities are not able to solve their problems without state support. And I think that the current government does everything to make situation even more difficult for cities because the discussion is not about programmatic issues, but about politics, not capital letter P, but P, this small character. And it leads nowhere. I think that those who spent years, many years ago when the local government was reestablished in Poland, are very, very unhappy. Some of them, they passed away some years ago, and I think that they are looking very sad at what's going on. I'm very critical. What we observe is centralization, and it leads nowhere. That's my opinion. And we may face really big crisis pretty soon because it's not only about politics, it's about social life, it's about building, walls and dividing society. So it's a very dangerous game that central government is playing right now. That's my opinion.
Well, okay, maybe these final words are not very optimistic, but nevertheless, I would like to thank all of you for this really, really inspiring discussion. I'm sure that anybody who heard us also found it inspiring, and I hope to see you next time directly during any event or just during some, small personal meetings that we miss so much. Thank you very much, and see you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was good to see you. Thank you.
See you. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you.
Thank you.